My son called me confused, a relic who was losing her mind, all so he could steal the company I poured my life into. He thought I was too old to fight back. He didn't know I made one call to the only lawyer who could rip it all away from him. This is the story of how I made him pay. But before I tell you how, I have to ask you a question. Have you ever poured your life into something only to have someone you love treat it like their birthright, then told your experience is outdated? Have you ever had your genuine concerns for the future dismissed as simple fear, or worse, confusion? If you believe loyalty is a one-way street, this story is not for you. This is a story about the fine print, about the promises we make and the price of breaking them. Stay with me, and I will show you the exact ruinous cost of underestimating your mother. It began with the smell of rosemary and thyme in a kitchen too small for my dreams. My company, Vance & Co., wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born on a battered oak table while my two children, Daniel and Chloe, slept upstairs. My husband, Robert, God rest his soul, was my first and only investor. He took out a second mortgage on our little house, not because he understood profit margins, but because he saw the fire in my eyes. "Eleanor," he'd say, while bottling my first batch of infused olive oils, "your passion is the only collateral I need." We built it together, from that tiny kitchen to a stall at the local farmer's market, then a small shop, and then a force. When Robert passed, Vance & Co. was my life raft. It was more than a business. It was the house he and I had built, board by board. And I made a promise to his memory that I would protect it, that I would steward it for our children. Bringing Daniel into the company felt like the most natural thing in the world. He was my son. He had my husband's smile and, I thought, my ambition. I gave him a starting role in marketing and proudly watched him rise. He was smart, I'll give him that. He was charming. He learned the business quickly, so quickly, in fact, that he soon began to think he had invented it. The 1,000 cuts began so subtly I barely noticed them. It started with language. In board meetings, my long-term strategies, the very ones that had weathered 2 recessions, were suddenly nostalgic. My new packaging idea for our heritage line was quaint. These weren't business criticisms. They were dismissals wrapped in corporate jargon. They were little pats on the head, designed to make me feel like a beloved but increasingly irrelevant figurehead. Then came the closed-door meetings. I'd arrive at a scheduled 10 a.m. strategy session to find the real meeting had already happened. My senior managers, people I had mentored for decades, would look sheepish. Daniel would just smile, his brilliant, polished smile, and say, "Mom, we were just getting a head start. Didn't want to bother you with the boring details." But I knew. I was being managed. I was being slowly, methodically edged out of the heart of my own company. The first time he brought up my retirement, it was framed as an act of love. He sat me down in my office, the one with the view of the oak tree I'd planted when we first broke ground on the building, and spoke about my legacy. He wanted me to enjoy my golden years, to travel, to garden. He said it was his turn to carry the burden. He made it sound like a gift, but it felt like an eviction notice. I told him quite firmly that my mind was as sharp as ever and I'd retire when I was good and ready. The look of fleeting, impatient anger in his eyes was something I chose to ignore. I told myself it was just ambition, a son's eagerness to step into his father's shoes. I was wrong. It wasn't ambition. It was pure predatory entitlement. The final straw wasn't a business decision. It was the insult, pure and simple. I'd hosted the annual Vance & Co. holiday party at my home, a tradition since the very beginning. The house was filled with laughter, with the scent of pine and mulled wine. It was a night to celebrate our success, our corporate family. I felt a surge of pride looking at it all, the life Robert and I had built. Later in the evening, I stepped onto the patio for a breath of crisp winter air, and I heard his voice. Daniel's voice, coming from the shadows near the pardon. He was speaking to his wife, Amanda. Her laughter was sharp and thin, like shattered glass. She almost vetoed the new logistics contract, actually believed her old way of doing things was better. She just doesn't get it anymore. Amanda laughed again. How longer, Danny? This is getting painful to watch. She looks so frail. And then came the words that stopped my heart. My son, my own flesh and blood, whispered into the cold night air. Don't worry. I've been talking with Harrison and Gray on the board. We're laying the groundwork. Gently, of course. We'll start by taking over her financial portfolio for her protection. Once we establish she's no longer competent to manage her own affairs, triggering the mental fitness clause in the bylaws will be a formality. She's centile, darling. It's sad, but it's a blessing in disguise. By summer, she'll be happily gardening, and the company will be where it belongs, with me. He said it with such casual cruelty. Centile. The word hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed at the very core of my identity. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I simply stood in the darkness, the cold seeping into my bones, and I let the truth wash over me. I wasn't her mother anymore. I was an obstacle. I turned around, walked back into the warmth of the party, and smiled at my guests. But in that moment, something inside me shifted forever. The mother who had forgiven every slight, every condescending remark, every casual act of disrespect died on that patio. And the founder of Vance & Co., the woman who built an empire from a single sprig of rosemary, was resurrected. This was no longer a family squabble. This was a war, and he had just handed me my battle plan.
I drove home from the party in a state of chilling clarity. The grief I should have felt for the son I had lost was absent. Grief is an indulgence, a warm, messy emotion reserved for unexpected loss. This was not a loss. It was a diagnosis. My son was a disease, and I now understood the cure would have to be surgical. My house, which had felt like a sanctuary just hours before, now felt like a compromised asset. I didn't go to my bedroom. Instead, I went to my late husband's study. It was a room I had preserved just as he'd left it. The scent of old paper and the faintest trace of his pipe tobacco hung in the air. It was a room of quiet strength, a place of reason. I walked to his mahogany desk, sat in his leather chair, and opened a small, locked drawer. Inside, beneath a stack of his old letters, was a single thick business card, its edges softened by time. The name on it was Arthur Lexington. I didn't call him that night. An attack launched in the heat of emotion is an attack that fails. I slept a dreamless, efficient sleep. The next morning, at precisely 9 o'clock, I made the call. He answered on the second ring, his voice the same as it had always been, a low, reassuring baritone that exuded competence. Arthur Lexington? Arthur, it's Eleanor Vance. There was a warmth in his voice as he replied. Eleanor, what a pleasant surprise. How are you? Still taking over the world one bottle of balsamic at a time, I hope. I'm afraid the world is attempting to take something back, I said, my tone even. I have a problem, Arthur. A hostile takeover. Good heavens, he said, the warmth vanishing, replaced by professional focus. Who's the aggressor? A competitor? I paused, letting the weight of my next word settle. The aggressor is my son Daniel. The takeover is predicated on the claim of my mental incompetence. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. I could picture him perfectly, sitting in his own study, his brow furrowed, a righteous anger building behind his calm exterior. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight. That ungrateful, conniving... Emotion is a luxury, Arthur. I am not calling for sympathy. I am calling because this company has your fingerprints all over its foundational documents. I need the architect of Vance & Co., not a compassionate friend. I heard him take a slow, steadying breath. Understood, Eleanor, you have him. Tell me everything. I laid out the overheard conversation with the precision of a military briefing. I repeated words senile, incompetent, and mental fitness clause, like exhibits in a courtroom. I explained Daniel's strategy, to seize control of my personal finances to create the illusion of incapacity, thereby giving him leverage with the board. When I was finished, Arthur was quiet for a long moment. Then I heard a low chuckle. It was a dangerous sound. Eleanor, he said, I swear the arrogance of the young is a miracle of nature. Daniel was in grammar school when we drafted those bylaws. He skimmed them, I'm sure, but he hasn't read them, not the way we did. Get to the point, Arthur. He's forgotten, hasn't he? Arthur's voice was now filled with a thrilling, predatory glee. He's so focused on the standard mental fitness clause that he's completely ignored the section it's subordinate to. Section 4, subclause B. We spent a week on it, you and I. We called it the Founder's Clause. Your late husband insisted on it. It states that you, as the primary founder, hold a permanent, non-dilutable, non-transferable, and absolute veto power over any and all changes to executive control of Vance & Co. for the duration of your natural life. A cool wave of triumph washed over me. I had forgotten. In the decades of peace and prosperity, I had forgotten the armor Robert and Arthur had built for me. To even begin proceedings under the mental fitness provision, the motion requires the sign-off of 3 independent, board-certified neurologists, a judicial order, and my signature as the acting counsel who wrote the document. He has precisely none of those things. He paused. He thinks he's attacking a fortress. He doesn't realize you hold the deed to the land the fortress is built on. My plan, which had been a formless cloud of anger, now crystallized. He plans to use my finances as the key, I said. We will begin by taking that key away from him. My thoughts exactly, Arthur said. He wants to frame you as confused and vulnerable. So our first move will be a demonstration of absolute clarity and formidable strength. I will draft a letter of formal notice. It will be delivered by private courier to the home address of every single board member, including the 2 you mentioned, Harrison and Gray. It will not be sent to Daniel. What will it say? I asked. It will be simple, Arthur replied. It will state that I, Arthur Lexington, have been fully reinstated as your sole personal and corporate counsel, effective immediately. And it will politely inform them that all matters pertaining to your financial portfolio, your trust, and your controlling shares in Vance & Co. are now under my exclusive legal purview, effective immediately. And it will politely inform them that any and all inquiries regarding these matters are to be directed to my office. and that any attempt to communicate with you directly on these subjects will be viewed as an attempt to circumvent legal counsel. It was perfect. It wasn't an attack, it was a wall. A beautiful, impenetrable wall of steel, built of paper and ink. It would land not with a bang, but with a quiet, terrifying click of a key turning in a lock he never knew existed. "Send it tomorrow," I said. "It's already being drafted," Arthur replied. "Rest well, Eleanor. The game has changed." The next day, I spent the morning in my garden. It was ironic. Daniel wanted to relegate me to a life of quiet gardening, and here I was, turning over soil, feeling the sun on my back, with the quiet confidence of a general on the eve of a decisive battle. The couriers had made their deliveries before noon. I knew the calls would be flying between the board members. I knew they would be panicked, and I knew that they would call their new leader. At 3:15 p.m., my phone buzzed on the small patio table beside me. The screen lit up with his name, Daniel. I looked at the name, the son who believed me to be a fading relic. A faint, knowing smile touched my lips. I pressed the silence button. The buzzing stopped. A moment later, it lit up again, a text message. "Harrison just called me. What the hell is this legal letter?" Then another. "What is Arthur Lexington doing?" And a third. "Mum, pick up the phone now." I picked up my teacup. The messages kept coming, a frantic digital tide of confusion and rage. I took a slow sip. The tea was warm, the sun was pleasant, and from my quiet garden I could hear the distant, beautiful sound of my son's carefully constructed world beginning to detonate.
For the next 2 days, I did not respond. I followed Arthur's explicit instructions. Weaponized silence. My non-reaction was, in itself, a strategic act. It amplified their panic. It denied them a target for their anger. I became a blank space onto which they projected their growing fear. To Daniel, who had built his plan on the premise of my weakness, my silence must have been maddening. He was used to me being accommodating, to smoothing things over. My sudden impenetrability was a direct contradiction to the narrative he had sold himself and, more importantly, the board. On the third day, the public counterattack began. It started, as I knew it would, on social media. A long, heartfelt post appeared on Amanda's Instagram page, accompanied by her soft-focus photo of her and Daniel with me, taken at the holiday party just before my son had revealed his treachery. Her text was a masterpiece of passive aggression and manufactured concern. "So worried about my wonderful mother-in-law, Eleanor," she wrote. "Lately, she hasn't been herself, and it's been heartbreaking to watch. As a family, we're trying to step in and offer our support to help manage the overwhelming stress of the company she built, but we're being met with a wall of lawyers. It's so confusing and sad. All we want is to protect her and her legacy." The comments flooded in, a predictable tide of syrupy sympathy. "Oh, Amanda, you are such a good daughter-in-law. So sorry you're going through this. Praying for your family." They were expertly painting a public portrait of a loving family trying to save a confused elderly matriarch from the clutches of a manipulative, money-grubbing lawyer. They were framing me not as a founder, but as a victim. Their victim. Arthur called me the moment his own paralegal flagged the post. "It's a classic frame job," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "They're trying to win the court of public opinion before they even step into a real one. They want to make you look isolated and paranoid." "And what is our response?" I asked, my voice calm. "Our response is nothing. Or rather, your response is nothing. My response, however, will be precise. He's made his first unforced error. He's taken the fight public. He told me his plan. It wasn't to engage in their mudslinging. It was to dismantle their entire platform of concern with a single, irrefutable act of professional validation. That afternoon, a press release was issued. It wasn't from Vance & Co. It was from the Women's Business Council, one of the most prestigious and respected organizations in the industry. I had been a founding member, but hadn't been active in years. The release was short and powerful. It announced that I, Eleanor Vance, had accepted an honorary lifetime seat on their executive board. But the masterstroke was in the quote they had solicited from the council's formidable chairwoman, a titan of industry named Margaret Shaw. Eleanor Vance is more than a pioneer. She is a visionary. Her business acumen has never been sharper, and her insights into the future of our industry are, as always, invaluable. The council is not just honoring her past achievements. We are investing in her future guidance. We are thrilled and privileged to have her active voice and wisdom back at the table. Arthur had arranged it with a single phone call. The press release wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a character reference from the highest possible authority. It was splashed across industry news sites and business journals. It made Amanda's Instagram post look exactly what it was, a petty, self-serving piece of gossip. You can't claim a woman is losing her mind on Monday, when on Tuesday, the most powerful business council in the state announces they are seeking her counsel. The narrative war was a rout. The panic text from Daniel started again, but this time they had a different flavor. The anger was still there, but it was curled with a new and delicious ingredient: confusion. What is this about the WBC? Why didn't you tell me you were rejoining the council? He still didn't understand. He thought these were things happening to me. He couldn't grasp that I was the one making them happen. A week later, the power had fully, irrevocably shifted. The board members, Harrison and Gray, who had been so easily swayed by Daniel's conspiracy, were now terrified. They weren't business executives orchestrating a clever coup. They were accomplices to a failed one, legally tethered to a lawyer who had just publicly humiliated their chosen leader. The final blow in this act was delivered, once again, not by me, but by Arthur, acting on my behalf. He called an emergency board meeting. By this point, my presence wasn't even required. I was at home, listening to the proceedings on a secure conference line, a silent ghost in their machine. Arthur's tone was not aggressive. It was the calm, measured voice of a man who held all the cards. Good morning, everyone. Let's dispense with the preliminaries. It has come to my attention that certain members of this board have been engaged in extra-official discussions regarding the leadership of Vance & Co. and the personal, financial, and mental capacity of my client, Eleanor Vance. The silence was absolute. Let me be unequivocally clear. Any further discussion of my client's health, mental or physical, by any person in this room will be met with a lawsuit for defamation and slander so swift and so merciless it will make your head spin. The Founders Clause of the Vance & Co. bylaws, a copy of which I have helpfully placed before each of you, renders your entire back-channel conspiracy moot. It is an impenetrable shield. He paused. However, he said, and I could hear the faint rustle of papers, Eleanor is a reasonable woman. She is, as ever, concerned with the stability and future of this company. Therefore, she has authorized me to propose a new temporary measure to ensure that stability. I outlined my terms. A new quote-unquote oversight committee would be formed, effective immediately. It would consist of 3 people: myself,
the chairwoman of the Women's Business Council, Margaret Shaw, and Arthur Lexington. This committee would have the power to review and veto all executive decisions made by the acting CEO, my son, Daniel. It was checkmate. Daniel was still CEO, but he was a king in a gilded cage. He had the title, but absolutely no power. Every contract, every hire, every major decision would now have to pass through a committee controlled by the very woman he had tried to depose. He was neutered, publicly and professionally, with the full legal backing of the company's own rules. From my kitchen table, I listened to the stammered acceptances from the board. I heard Daniel's choked, barely audible, agreed. I knew in that moment that he had lost. The war for the narrative was over. Now all that was left was his unconditional surrender. And I was going to enjoy watching him crawl.
The Oversight Committee was my scalpel, and I began to use it with surgical precision. Daniel's leadership quickly descended into a series of quiet, humiliating defeats. His first major proposal was a rebranding initiative, a multi-million-dollar campaign designed to make Vance & Co. feel younger, more disruptive. It was a classic move, an attempt to erase my legacy and stamp his own image onto the company. He presented it to the committee with a forced plastic enthusiasm. When he was done, Margaret Shaw, a woman whose glare could curdle milk, looked at him over the top of her glasses. "So your strategy is to spend $12 million to alienate your core demographic, the one with all the disposable income, in favor of a younger market that values trends over quality? It's bold, Daniel, and colossally stupid." My contribution was simpler. "I veto," I said, my voice even. I didn't need to explain why. The veto was its own explanation. It was a demonstration of pure power. I watched the colored train from Daniel's face. His entire strategy, his first act as the supposedly unshackled leader, was dismantled with 2 words. This became the pattern. Every one of his attempts to assert control was met with our quiet, unified, and absolute denial. He was a phantom CEO, a powerless figurehead rattling the bars of a cage he didn't even see until it was locked. This brought me a certain grim satisfaction, but it wasn't the final victory. It was merely the softening of the target. The real retribution had to be personal. It had to come from the confused old woman herself. His first gambit was an attempt at emotional manipulation. He appeared at my door one evening, unannounced, holding a bouquet of my favorite lilies. It was a performance of the contrite son. His eyes were wide with practiced sincerity. "Mum," he began, his voice soft, "we need to talk, without the lawyers. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding." I looked at the flowers, then at him. "A misunderstanding?" I replied, my voice cool. "What part was misunderstood, Daniel? The part where you called me senile, or the part where you plotted to seize my assets?" He flinched. "I was worried about you. You seemed so lost. I was trying to help." "My help," I said, stepping aside and gesturing to the living room, "is in the kitchen, second drawer to the left of the sink. You'll find the trash bags in there. You can start by taking out the garbage." The mask of concern shattered, replaced by a flash of his true, petulant anger. "I'm trying to apologize here." I met his gaze, and for the first time he saw not his mother, but the founder of Vance & Co. "No," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "You are trying to regain leverage. You came here because you've realized your professional avenues are blocked, so you've reverted to the one you think you still control, the emotional one. You are mistaken.
That line of credit has been permanently closed. I gestured to the door. Good night, Daniel. He stood there, speechless, the ridiculous bouquet of lilies hanging from his hand like a wilted flag of surrender. He left. The flowers remained on my doorstep. I left them there, to wilt in the sun, a small public monument to his failed gambit. His next move was more pathetic. A public relations firm, likely hired at his own expense, began placing saccharine articles in local lifestyle blogs. They were stories about family, forgiveness, and the challenges of legacy. They were transparently aimed at me, little white flags waved from a distance. One of them, titled The Vance Legacy, a Son's Devotion, even quoted an anonymous source close to the family, describing Daniel's heartbreak over the family rift. I had Arthur send the editor a simple letter. It pointed out a minor factual inaccuracy in the article's timeline. It was a tiny correction, but it served its purpose. It was a shot across the bow, a clear message that a legal sniper was watching them, and that continuing this line of narrative would come at a cost. The article stopped. His final, most depraved gambit was a direct attack on my emotional foundation. I received a registered letter. Inside was not a legal document, but a photograph. It was a picture of my grandchildren, Daniel's 2 children, smiling on a beach. Scrawled on the back in his handwriting were 5 words. They miss their grandmother. He was using his own children as human shields, as bargaining chips. It was a vile, despicable act. He truly believed my love for my grandchildren was a weakness he could exploit, and it would have been had he not already cauterized that part of my heart. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a clarifying rage. This is the monster he truly was. My response was not to him, but to his wife. I forwarded a copy of the Oversight Committee's resolution to Amanda's personal email, along with the minutes from the meeting where I vetoed Daniel's rebranding campaign. My email to her contained only one sentence. This is the future your husband has secured for your children. I knew that Amanda, for all her passive-aggressive social media posts, was fundamentally a pragmatist. Her alliance with Daniel was based on the promise of wealth and status. I had just provided her with irrefutable proof that the Bank of Daniel was not only closed, it was insolvent. I was showing her that she had backed the losing horse. The trap was now fully set. I had defeated him professionally, I had thwarted his emotional manipulations, and I had sown dissent in his own home. He was isolated, powerless, and running out of options. The king was trapped in his cage. It was time for the final reckoning.
The final act was not set in my home or in the boardroom. It was set in Arthur's office, a neutral territory that was, in reality, entirely mine. Arthur summoned Daniel for a formal mediation, a final attempt, he claimed, to avoid further litigation and find a stable path forward for the company. Daniel agreed, I think, because he was out of ideas. He was a cornered animal, and he likely believed it was his last chance to negotiate some shred of a victory. He walked in trying to project an aura of confidence, his expensive suit looking more like a costume than ever before. He nodded curtly at me and sat opposite me at the long, polished mahogany table. Arthur sat at the head, the picture of impartial authority. "Thank you for coming, Daniel," Arthur began, his voice calm and procedural. "Your mother and I believe it's in the best interest of all parties to resolve this situation definitively." He leaned forward, a smug look on his face. "I agree, and I'm willing to be reasonable. I propose we dissolve the Oversight Committee. It's clearly causing more harm than good, hamstringing the company's growth.
I'll remain as CEO, and my mother can take on a proper, dignified founder emeritus role. Her legacy will be honored, and she can finally rest. It was his last desperate play, the same offer dressed in new words. I didn't say a word. I simply looked at Arthur. He gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. The show was over. It was time for the verdict. "Thank you, Daniel," Arthur said, his voice turning icy. "That's a very illuminating proposal. However, we are not here to discuss your future as CEO. He slid a single crisp document across the table. It was not thick or intimidating. It was a single page. "We're here to discuss this." Daniel picked it up, a confused frown on his face. I watched as he read it. I saw his eyes scan the first line, then the second. I saw his blood drain from his face. I saw his hand begin to tremble, ever so slightly. The document was not a lawsuit. It was not a proposal. It was a formal invocation of Section 4, Subclause B, the Founder's Clause, my absolute non-negotiable veto power. The document stated in cold legal language that I was vetoing his position on the board of directors, that I was vetoing his employment at Vance & Co. in any and all capacities. It was a corporate death sentence. It concluded with a single brutal sentence, personally drafted by me. Effective immediately. Your services are no longer required. This is a joke," he stammered, his voice thin, looking wildly at Arthur. "You can't do this. The board elected me CEO. Arthur leaned back in his chair, a look of profound theatrical pity on his face. "The board, Daniel, does not have the authority. As the bylaws, which you so clearly fail to study, make plain, the founder's power supersedes any and all board appointments. You were never truly CEO. You were a guest serving at her pleasure, and it is no longer her pleasure." That's when the polished veneer of my son finally completely cracked. The charming executive vanished, and a terrified little boy took his place. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a panicked, desperate hope. "Mum," he whispered, "you can't do this. I'm your son. I'm Samily." I met his gaze across the gleaming table. The silence stretched. I let him sit in it, let him stew in the wreckage of his own creation. Then I gave him my final verdict. "No, Daniel, family was your shield. You tried to use it as a weapon. And as for your confusion, I have never been clearer in my life." "Arthur," I said, turning away from my son for the last time, "please see that security is informed. I believe Mr. Vance needs to collect his personal effects from his office." I stood up. I didn't look at him again. I watched his reflection in the polished wood of the table as he crumpled, his head in his hands, a choked sob escaping his lips. It was the sound of absolute defeat. That evening, I received a final barrage of texts. One from him, a pathetic single-word message, "Please." One from Amanda, a frantic, furious screed accusing me of destroying her family. I read them both with a dispassionate sense of closure. Then I opened his contact, a name and number that hath been a fixture in my life for 45 years. I pressed block. Then I opened Amanda's, and I pressed it again. The ledger was balanced. The debt had been paid. The final severance was complete.
In the weeks that followed the final severance, a quiet, industrious peace descended upon my life. The noise was gone. The frantic energy of Daniel's failed war, the constant need for vigilance, the hum of simmering conflict, it all dissipated, leaving behind a clean, clear silence. Arthur handled the corporate fallout with ruthless efficiency. A press release was issued announcing Daniel's resignation to pursue other opportunities, a classic piece of corporate fiction that everyone in the industry understood for exactly what it was, a quiet execution. I stepped back into the role of CEO, not as a placeholder, but as a restorer. The first thing I did was dismantle the opulent, ridiculously expensive office Daniel had built for himself, a gaudy testament to his ego, all chrome and black leather. I had it refurnished with comfortable chairs, warm wood, and a large round table. I reinstituted an open-door policy. I walked the floors of the packaging plant, knew the names of my employees, tasted the new batches of products straight from the line. I was not just running a company. I was tending a garden that had been overrun with weeds. Slowly, painstakingly, I was bringing it back to health. I sold my large family home. It held too many ghosts, too many memories of a family that was now a fiction. It sold quickly. With the proceeds, I didn't buy another sprawling mansion. I bought a penthouse apartment in the heart of the city, with a wide terrace that overlooked the skyline. It was modern, clean, and filled with light. It was a space that belonged only to me. There were no ghosts here. The first piece of furniture I bought for it was a small, perfectly crafted writing desk, which I placed by the window. I didn't hear from Daniel, but I heard about him. Amanda left him, taking the children. I'd expected that. Her loyalty was always transactional, and his account was now overdrawn. The last I heard, he had taken a mid-level marketing job at a competitor. A humiliating step down. They hired him, I suspect, hoping he held some of Vance & Co.'s trade secrets. They would be disappointed. Daniel was never interested in the secrets of the product. He was only interested in the glamour of the throne. One evening, about 6 months after it was all over, Arthur and I were having dinner on my new terrace. The city lights twinkled below us like a fallen constellation. "Are you happy, Eleanor?" he asked, swirling the wine in his glass. I considered the question. Happy felt like the wrong word. It was too small, too fleeting. "I am at peace, Arthur," I replied. "I've discovered there's a profound difference between loneliness and solitude. I have found my solitude, and it is productive." We fell into a comfortable silence, the silence of old friends who had weathered a great storm together. It was then I realized who my real family was. It wasn't the one forged by blood, which had proven to be conditional. It was the one forged by loyalty, by Arthur's unwavering support, by the quiet competence of my longtime employees, by Margaret Shaw and the women on the council who had stood with me without question. I had lost a son, but I had found my tribe. This story was never really about revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy fire. This was about restoring balance to a universe that had been knocked off its axis. It was a story about consequences. My son believed he had the right to my life's work simply because he shared my blood. He was wrong. A legacy is not an inheritance. It is a responsibility. And he proved himself in the final analysis irresponsible. I look out at the city now,
at the endless sea of lights, each one a story, a struggle, a quiet victory, or a silent defeat. My story is just one of them. So I will ask you one last question. What is the value of your peace? What is the price of your self-respect? They will tell you to forgive, to forget, to keep the peace at any cost. But sometimes peace is not a gift. Sometimes it is an accomplishment. It is the quiet shore you reach after a long and necessary war. If this story has resonated with you, if you too have ever had to fight for that shore, subscribe. There are more stories to tell. Because for every predator who thinks they have found an easy meal, there is a matriarch somewhere quietly preparing her balance sheet. And the final accounting is always a sight to behold.